So apparently the daughter only wanted to see Clara Barton, and we didn't say anyway. So they'll get over it, I guess. But I feel kind of bad. So all right, Portraits of Leadership, Week 3. What? Here we go. Give me a sec. Technical difficulties, as per usual.
Came in, I'm like, is it blizzard?
There can't be probably more drastically different leaders than the ones we're going to talk about tonight. We have Clara, who's, I think, kind of the persistent leader, trailblazer, who gets knocked down again and again and again and keeps getting back up. We're going to call her like Rocky. Good evening, guys. And then these two, I know we've done a lot with them in World War II. We're going to, kind of go through their war stuff, but especially Eisenhower, what did he do later? And I almost switched them out and did like Doug MacArthur and a couple people like that. But I stuck with Eisenhower because he's that quiet, kind of almost Martha Washington-ish leader, where he does a lot of stuff, but nobody really knows exactly. We know about D-Day and we know about ending World War II, but then what did he do? And then there's George, and George is he's just fun. Kind of a wonky. So you have the drastic, Rocky Clara Barton, the quiet, unassuming Dwight Eisenhower, and then the flamboyant, egotistical George Patton. So Clara, who has always been, your son today, he stopped by, right?
Yeah.
He walked in, and I'm like, oh my God. But he said the lady, he has his long hair. The ladies like it. No, but I wanted to get a pair of scissors so bad. I'm like, where's your mom?
Do you know how many times I've tried?
No, let's do it. I'll help. All right.
So,
Yeah.
he left. All he wanted to know when he saw you today is what you thought about Trump.
He didn't ask.
He didn't have time.
Tell
And
him.
he's going to be voting.
Tell him to
For
come
the first
back.
time.
Tell him to come back. I need probably about a half hour.
Okay.
That was going to be long. So anyway, all right. Well, from Donald Trump to Clara Barton. Shake my head there a little bit. All right, shake it off. All right. Good old Clara, born Christmas Day, and I've always been a big fan of Clara. If any of your kids have done the Wax Museum, you always want your kids to be able to pick and choose. But my daughter's like, Dad, who should we be? And I'm like, Clara Barton would be an outstanding person. What about a fine, great, but hey, we don't know where she is. All right, we know where Clara is. All right. So anyway, really like Clara. Born Christmas Day, 1821. And she was that very quiet, kind of nerdy little kid who was so smart, her parents sent her to school when she was 3. Because while she could barely walk, she could read it and write, and was a great speller. But she was extremely shy. She wouldn't talk to anybody. She would kind of cower in the corner, and she never had a lot of friends. But when she was about 6 or 7, she started roughhousing with her boy cousin. She was like sword fighting and running around, jumping out of trees and wrestling. And her mom goes, well, Clara, you're not acting like a little lady. And she's like, well, Mom, it's not any fun. Like, that's boring. Like, I'm gonna do that. And it's how she the only time they saw any personality out of her was when she was playing with her brothers and her cousins. And when she was 10, her brother falls off a barn, hits his head pretty bad, breaks his arm, and gets a bad cut, and it gets an infection. So the family actually has to break down and get a doctor. Well, the doctor was traveling, he couldn't be there all the time, and her brother needed almost constant care, so she goes, I'll do it. She's like, oh, dear, you're like 10, you can't do this. Yeah, I can do this. And it turns out that over his illness, she had to increase and then decrease the dosage of his medicine wash and clean his wounds, and a couple different times apply leeches to get away some of the dead skin so it wouldn't get infected or gangrenous. So this is kind of a gross, nasty, smelly job, and here is little Clara doing it at the age of 10. No one thought her brother was going to get better, but he makes a full recovery. So it's at the young age of 10 where we see little Clara here being a pretty good nurse. So there she is. It's kind of a stoic, woman. Like she's like, she's going to take on all comers. She's going to get knocked down again and again and again, but very, very resilient. And so, and this how this works, I don't know. Because she was so shy, her parents said, what would be a good job for you? Being a school teacher. Okay, all right, whatever. All right, logic. So she becomes a teacher when she's only 17 in 1839. And it said that whatever her parents thought, however it worked out, being a teacher allows her to grow into her own. She was a natural teacher. And when she begins teaching in northern New York, she gets very angry at the way some of the district lines were drawn and how women teachers were getting paid less and doing more work than some of their male counterparts. And where she was teaching was right next to a factory. But the workers at the factory, their children could not go to school. It was a completely gerrymandered district. And she's like, well, if mom and dad are working for long hours, why can't their kid go to school right next door, especially when they live in the same town? At least during lunch or something, they could at least go to work or go home from work together. So she champions redrawing of district boundaries, and she's only like 18, 19 years old. A very gutsy thing for her to do in the early 1840s. She was such a good teacher and such a good speaker that many of the people in the factory backed her, and since they were the economic source, people listened, and she goes, you know what? I think that women should be paid the exact same as men when it comes to teaching. Why are they getting paid more? And people are like, well, sorry, Clara, because you're a woman. You're going to get married, you're going to have kids, and you're going to quit, so just take it and like it. She's like, no, I'm not going to back down. So she will spend the next 12 years teaching in Canada and in West Georgia, like Canada to Georgia, how that happens. But she was actively recruited for school districts trying to increase the enrollments of their children. A lot of these places were rural, a lot of them were farmers, so not a lot of people sent their kids to school because they were helping on the farm, but she was a big name. She was like a rock star teacher back in her day, and if Clara Barton showed up, not only did she teach, but she helped to organize, she did things in the community, she acted as principal, so she was a total package. So she's a highly sought after recruited teacher who spends a lot of time on the road. One of the things that gained her a lot of notoriety was her ability to handle rambunctious boys. Now, she was not a very tall woman, but she was very strong. And when boys would act up, she would sometimes challenge them to foot races, sometimes to little stick sword fights. She's, if I beat you, you have to shut up and listen. And she won all the time. They're like, oh, wait a minute, Miss Barton's no joke. And she said it was growing up roughhousing with her brothers and her cousins that taught her all those lessons. She goes, I would often try and target who was the bully or the biggest troublemaker, and I would go right at him. Once I took him out, him and his little crew would respect and follow me. So as a result, in 1852, right in the heart of the beginning of the big emotional buildup, Uncle Tom's Cabin will be published. This was right in the embroilment coming up to the Civil War. Clara Barton is asked to come to Bordentown, New Jersey, and open up a free school. Town was going to pay for it. They wanted to attract, workers and artisans. So if we have a really good school system, people are going to come. So they get Clara. And Clara works tirelessly. By herself, she teaches almost 300 students. They rotate in at different times throughout the day. So she was doing like shift work, okay, from like 9 to 12, 100 comes in, and then 12 to 3, and then 3 to 6, and it was wearing her down. She was so good, she gets permission to hire an assistant, and the enrollment jumps up to 600. So 2 ladies are teaching 600 students, and the enrollment increases. They were getting paid $250 a year to teach, constantly, 11, 12 hours a day. But because of their success rate, the town's like, wow, you 2 are really good. Will you stay for a long-term contract if we build you a new school? Clara's like, yeah, I would like it to look like this, and I want this and that, and a green space and some trees and some shade, and we can go outside. And they build Clara's school. And then, what happens? Close to the Civil War. Someone said it. Who said it? Can a woman run a school like this? Yeah, we're going to hire a guy. All right? We're going to get one of those fat buffoons in here to run the show. So here's Clara's school. It looks like a nice house. She wanted it to be warm and inviting to draw students in. Now clearly, all 600 students couldn't fit in there at one time, but she wanted it to feel like home. So on the outside, it looked like a house, and on the inside, it was 3 different classrooms and an office. And as it takes off, and everybody's super excited about the job she's doing, Clara gets demoted. They came after her. They asked her, what do you want the school to look like? She goes, this, this, and this. And then they're like, hey, this is really awesome, so we're going to demote you. And they hire a guy because the new school board said the position of power and all the things that she was doing was unfit for a woman. Clearly, Miss Barton, you're getting gray hair, you're losing weight, you're too stressed, you pour a little delicate flour. We're going to go get a guy to do this. She was promoted to female assistant, but when it came time to get anything done, everybody went to Clara. All right, kids went to Clara, parents went to Clara, community members went to Clara. So the principal got angry. She was a threat to his position. So he piled on and piled on and piled on more work and ground her down. Couldn't get rid of her, but if I make her leave, then I'm going to be okay. Finally, she has a nervous breakdown and has to take some time off. Clara leaves to get better. What happens to the school? It falls apart. All right, so Clara's gone. She goes to Washington, D.C., and she meets some friends, and she was very organized and thrifty, and she gets a job as a clerk in the U.S. Patent Office. Once again, Clara has passion and energy. She takes over. She's organizing things, and she becomes the very first woman in the federal government in the clerk system in the Patent Office where she got a salary equal to a man's. They said, man, this woman is great. Give her whatever she wants. She's running the Patent Office pretty much single-handedly. Go, 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 go. So Clara has taken over. But in comes one of the most worthless presidents the United States has ever had. President James Buchanan. His nickname is the Do-Nothing President. And a lot of these people I picked because of the decisions that they make. Decisions, especially when you're in a position of power, are tough because, is it the right call? If anything goes wrong, you're going to be accountable. They're going to impact a large number of people. It could affect the success or failure of the country. So these aren't like, where are we going to go for dinner? These are big, monster decisions. Hi guys, my wife. How'd it go?
Went great. We have a rising freshman, so we were a rising freshman.
All right.
Enjoy.
All right.
Make him really tired so I don't have to deal with him when he comes home. Bye.
Bye. All right.
Are we going to ask a lot of questions?
Ask a lot of questions. We're going to stay late tonight. All right. With beer study or whatever, that's what we're doing. All right. There we go. All right. I've just given a hall pass, so I'm good. All right. So, James Buchanan is a buffoon. He's terrible, all right? He's the do-nothing president because he goes, well, if I make a decision, somebody's going to get angry, like they'll get mad. Well, you're president. It's the job, all right? They may get angry, but that half may really like it. Well, I don't know. If I do this, they're going to get mad. And if I do that, they're going to get mad. So I'll just do nothing, all right? That's going to be simple. One thing he does do is there was a growing opposition in the government for women taking men's jobs. They began looking for an example of somebody who's doing a job that a man should be doing, and right away, they spot Clara, because she's got that big salary. So once again, Clara is demoted. She goes from running the show to being a basic secretary. Then, when there's still a big outcry, her job is eliminated entirely. Clara loses her job once again. She's kind of devastated and angry. But you can see she has so many talents. And then comes the Civil War. Now, horrible war, 625,000 Americans are killed, but it is the perfect vehicle to allow Clara, the launch pad, to get her to be successful. She comes back to Washington in 1861, where she hoped with this new president, Lincoln, she can advocate for women to get government jobs. Look at all I've done. Every time I leave, the things fall apart. So give us a shot. And while she was there, the battles of First Bull Run Manassas, Second Bull Run Manassas, and the Peninsula Campaign had been fought. And one of the things she saw there wasn't enough of were medical supplies. So she starts a ladies' aid society. They begin wrapping bandages and gauze pads and old sheets and getting needles and thread for stitching, and just food, provisions, and water, not just for the soldiers, but in her mind it was the residents around the battlefield that are going to be displaced. They're out of food, their livestock have been killed, their crops are destroyed, and she begins to take it to people who needed it. And she runs into Chief Quartermaster Daniel Rucker. And he's like, well, what are you doing with all this stuff? My guys can't get it down to the front lines. We've got to carry like ammunition and other things. And she's like, well, I'll do it. Well, how are you going to do it? She's like, well, I've got a horse and a wagon and I'll just drive it out there. You can't do that, ma'am. They're going to kill you. Who is going to kill a woman driving a wagon full of medical supplies? And in fact, this story, if anybody remembers the old Mary Pope Osborne Magic Treehouse books, well, she puts this in one of her books. I actually read it to like Will's class in like the 4th or 5th grade, and I wrote her a note, had one of my costumes on, and she actually answered back. Apparently Mary Pope Osborne is also a big Clara Barton fan. But anyway, he gives her a free pass. You can go anywhere you want near the front lines. Anybody stops you, you show them this, and you're good to go. So Clara loads up her wagon, and off she goes to the front lines. And she gets there, and she looks at the field hospitals where either in open fields or in barns, chicken coops, all over the place. She goes, this is just not going to do. How can you operate and take care of soldiers in this environment? And they're like, well, ma'am, you can't go in there. You're going to get sick. This is no place for a lady. And she's like hell, all right, let me in there. I'm going to show you how to get this done. So she begins to distribute her goods that she collected as she saw fit. And the hospitals, when she showed up, had to have things laid out like she saw them. Let's organize these. Let's get the medical attention to every soldier we can. And what she demanded was that it was not only Union soldiers be taken care of, but Confederate combatants as well. She's like, I don't care who it is. If they need help, we're going to help them. Well, ma'am, you can't come here and tell us that. Do you want any of the supplies in the wagon? Oh, yeah, okay. So, finally, she's getting a little more aggressive, and she comes to national prominence at the Battle of Antietam. During the battle, American battlefield photographer Matthew Brady shows up, and he hears this story of carnage way over on the east side of Antietam in this cornfield. And he goes over there while the battle is still raging, and he takes some pictures of this woman walking across the battlefield. And it turns out to be Clara. And Clara had on, this is kind of gross, a full-length gown. And as she was walking over the battle of the cornfield, she said it was very hot, September 17th. She began to feel very heavy. And she thought that she was dizzy and she was going to faint because she couldn't pick up her feet. And she looked down, and her white dress, from dragging along the ground, had leached and soaked up blood almost all the way to the knee. So she starts to cut her dress away, and as she does, she finds the only guy alive. She had been looking for over 2 hours on the battlefield, a Confederate colonel. And as she bends down to help him, a shot rings out from over by the Dunker Church. It goes through her shirt sleeve and hits the colonel she was working on in the chest. And she's like, gosh darn it, you just shot one of your own, for God's sake. And she was angry and bitter at this, but just unfazed. And Matthew Brady saw this. He took some quick photographs, but it was the story he wrote about her that propels her to national prominence. And she is at that time known as the angel of the battlefield. Here's this woman walking through just absolute disgusting carnage in the middle of the battle, trying to find people that she can help. So in 1863, she enters her only and very long-standing relationship with General John Ewell. And Ewell was one of those connected guys, and he helps her get the nomination to be the lady in charge of all hospitals anywhere the Union Army is present. So she shows up not only at Antietam, but she will be at Fredericksburg. She will be at Gettysburg. She will be in and around at Cold Harbor. Clara pops up everywhere. Where the Army of the Potomac is, there is Clara right next to them. And so at Antietam, one of the few memorials to individual people there are is to Clara Barton. And it's this right at the edge of the battlefield, and they took 2 red bricks from the house where she was born and made them into a little red cross. As she will found the American Red Cross. It's one of the few individualized memorials on the Antietam battlefield. This is what things looked like when Clara showed up. It's very big. This is her way back here, the tiny little lady behind the tree, and you see guys laying scattered on the ground inside of a fence next to the hospital, which was a chicken coop. And she's like, this just isn't going to do. We're going to clean this place up. We're going to get these guys out of the dirt, and we're going to take over right now. A lot of times it was only enormous white, like canvas circus tents, but she's like, it's better than nothing. It's better than being in a chicken coop, for God's sake. So, at the end of the war, what does Clara do? She had a purpose. She couldn't be demoted because she was doing a job that nobody else wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, all these letters start pouring in. Can't find my son. Where's my husband? Where's my father? We don't know. Whom are they? All these letters pour into the War Department. What happened to my family? Are they dead? They're missing? They're a prisoner? What happened to them? And, Lincoln is, just about to be assassinated. And they're like, what do we do with all this stuff? And he's like, well, ask Clara if she'll help. All right. So Clara gets called up, couldn't answer because a lot of these guys were unknown. Nobody knew where they were buried. So Clara will spend the entire summer of 1865 after Lincoln's burial, and she is going to look after as many of these individuals as she can, and her first task is to go down to the Andersonville prison camp. Well, she will exhume and then rebury and identify 13,000 Union soldiers who were at that camp. One of the guys that she reburies is a great uncle of mine. So on his death certificate, we have, I meant to bring it in tonight, Clara Barton's actual signature. because of what she finds at Andersonville. Henry Wirtz, the commandant of Andersonville, is the only person in the Civil War that is arrested for war crimes. The worst witness that he could ever imagine is Clara Barton. What did you find? And by now, she's a big name personality. She goes, I don't know if he was responsible, but this is what I found. Starving guys, sick guys, guys buried in waste. There was no sanitation. And by the time she's done, they are, Henry, you're being hanged, brother. All right, you're done. He is sentenced to death, and he is hanged for war crimes at Andersonville. Yes, sir.
So that was a Union?
No, he's Confederate.
Confederate.
He's Confederate.
And
yeah.
where is Andersonville?
Georgia. Georgia. Elmira in Chicago was supposed to be the equivalent or even worse than Andersonville, but the Union wins, so nothing is said. The death rate, the number one, the worst prison of war camp in the entire Civil War was not either Elmira or Andersonville. It was actually Salisbury, North Carolina, where 31% of the inmates died. So there's still a little marker to it down there in Salisbury, but no one really says anything because, well, we'll just blame that on Andersonville. We'll let them have that one. So it was actually Salisbury. So anyway. So now, over the next 4 years, Clara has a purpose, and she works, doing a job, once again, nobody wants to do. She will find and bury and mark the graves of 20,000 more soldiers. That's 33,000 almost single-handedly. While she's doing this, she gets the idea of, how about the Office of Missing Soldiers? Let's make a permanent government office for not only this, but possible future conflicts. By the time she's done, her and her staff personally answer almost 42,000 letters, and they find and relocate, ship back, and rebury 22,000 dead soldiers. She will found what is now known as the American Battlefield Monuments Commission. Their job is to police the 89 American cemeteries across the world, and they will finance and hire the architects to build the monuments on the National Mall before they're turned over to the Park Service. Clara Barton is the inspiration for that office. As a result, she is given $15,000 to draw a salary and to use to complete this project. So Clara herself gets a check from Congress. Clara, now where's the principal back at the school that fired me? Had you guys not fired me, I might not be doing all of this. So, 1868, she starts to travel the country, and she's telling everybody and anybody what she's doing. And she's one of those few people that can travel not only in the North, but in the South during the bitterness of Reconstruction, and she is not attacked. No one is angry at her. She is just doing a job trying to find soldiers on both sides. So she is one of the few people who could go to both parts of the country and be received with open arms no matter where she was. While on this trip, she meets two people. Number one was Susan B. Anthony, who she strikes up a lifelong friendship with and is an assistant to Susan B. Anthony for women's suffrage. And she also meets Frederick Douglass. And the two won't speak, person to person very many more times, but they correspond to each other constantly. Frederick Douglass even asks her some advice. Well, I'm trying to build support for this. How would you go about doing it? You are the one that seems when you have something you want done, you get people to rally around you. How would you suggest I do? So here's the great Frederick Douglass asking little old Clara for help. Now here's one that kind of strikes me funny. Now, I don't mean to be mean here, but all of a sudden, Clara is tired. She's physically and emotionally worn out. So she goes, well, to recuperate, let's travel to Europe. Why sit at home? Why watch Netflix? I'll go abroad and, you know, see some good stuff. All right, so she goes to Europe. She's going to relax. And while there, she runs into a guy named Dr. Appia, a little Italian doctor. And they start talking. And she's like, well, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm here in Geneva trying to get this thing like the Red Cross to get more notoriety. Red Cross, what's that? Well, it's this organization where we bring aid to people who are involved in like conflicts like wars, or they're displaced, or if there's a natural disaster, we bring food, medical attention. Are you kidding me? And I've been doing that for like a decade. Like, really? I mean, like, you know, well, where did you do it? Well, I just drove my wagon up to Antioch. What? You were in, oh yeah, I got this. And so they instantly become friends. He's got this international organization he wants to start. He has started. He knows a lot of rich, powerful friends. He's like, could you possibly open up one of these in America? And she's like, look, I've been trying. I've been doing this, relocating soldiers. I don't really know. He's like, no, you are perfect. You're the person we've got to have. I will get financiers. Can you open the American Red Cross? If we get one in America, we'll get one all over Europe. You really got to do this. And she's like, well, all right, here we go. So here is the sign from her office door. It's in the Smithsonian office, 3rd story, room 9. That's where she ran the missing soldiers office from. And this is what she purposed. This is the very first branch of the American Red Cross. It is in Glen Echo, Maryland, just over the Potomac River, National Historic Site. And Clara opens the Red Cross from Glen Echo. So, while Clara was in Europe talking to Dr. Appia, little problem breaks out, the Franco-Prussian War. Otto von Bismarck, trying to gain some power, decides he's going to pick a fight with the French. Well, actually, he made it look like they picked the fight, and, well, we got to defend ourselves. So the Franco-Prussian War breaks out, and there's carnage all over the place. And as the war breaks out, not only did the King of Prussia, Wilhelm I, but Napoleon III of France said, hey, Clara, while you were here, could you take a look at our hospitals? Like, oh my God. Everywhere I go, there is a war. So she stays around and says, I will oversee your hospitals during this conflict, but they have to be neutral. Any soldier that comes into either a Prussian or a French hospital must be treated accordingly and humanely. If not, I'm out of here. If I see any mistreatment, I'm gone. Both emperors said, carte blanche, you see mistreatment, let me know, and we will take care of it. While the war is going on, Paris was under siege, and all the food that was supposed to be sent to the people of Paris was being diverted to the French army, who was being trashed. So Clara, using her clout, will travel through enemy lines and personally distribute food to the starving people of Paris in and around combat. As a result of her efforts during the Franco-Prussian War, she is giving the highest civilian honors in both countries. In Prussia, she got the Iron Cross and the Fleur de Merit from Napoleon III after the conflict. So now, Clara, already well known in the United States, is now an icon, superpower woman over in Europe. Now she says, it's time for me to go home. I'm going to get this Red Cross thing started. She comes back. She figures she's got the notoriety to do it. And President Rutherford B. Hayes, another kind of doofy president, says, well, that's a great idea, Clara, but we're really not going to need that. Like, we're not going to have another civil war, and we're not going to have one of those Franco-Prussian things, so we really don't need you. Thanks, but no. She's like, oh my God, what is wrong with you guys? So she waits patiently. She lives with relatives for a couple years. And then she comes back when Chester A. Arthur from New York becomes president. really kind of knows, and he doesn't really know what's going on. Wasn't even supposed to be nominated, but he is, and he wins. And she's like, hey, Chester, got an idea. And he says, you know what? That's a really good idea, but does it just have to be a war? She's like, no, 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 anything. Tornado, earthquake, hurricane, you know, locusts, you name it. If people have a problem, we will go and help. That's what we do. Food, medical supplies. He's like, great idea. And he authorizes her to be the first official president of the American Red Cross, May 21st, 1881. She is in charge. And almost immediately, the Red Cross is needed. The Spanish-American War starts. Boom. So she not only helps wounded soldiers, but refugees from Cuba to find places for them. 1884, there is a massive flooding of the Ohio River from West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, all the way down. She comes and brings assistance. Instantly, she was there with doctors and food and construction workers to help clear the roads, rebuild some temporary dams, and give medical care and food. Massive famine in Texas in the late 1880s. Clara Barton and her team were the first on site. While she's taking care of the famine in Texas, there was a large tornado outbreak in Illinois, so she got her hospital and things founded in Texas, got on a riverboat, went up the Mississippi River till she got a train, and went to Illinois and saw tornado relief right there. If that wasn't enough, we've got famine in Texas, tornadoes in Illinois, massive yellow fever outbreak all over Florida. Doctors who went down were getting sick. All of a sudden, no doctors would go down and help the citizens of Florida. So Clara puts another team together and handles her third crisis. All three were going on at the same time. So she did a little circuit. Illinois, Florida, Texas, back, forth, throughout the summer of 1888. So she's exhausted, but she learns that her skills and her, office is necessary. She will face her biggest challenge the next year in the great Johnstown flood of 1889. I had family living in Johnstown when Henry Frick's dam broke, just destroying a large swath of the valley. And it is Clara with 50 doctors and nurses that are the first on scene. And Clara's like, okay, yeah, you really don't need my office. Good one, Rutherford. Or every time I turn around, something else happens. She's taking care of America, but all of a sudden there's a massive earthquake in Turkey. She is sent to Constantinople to help not start the American Red Cross, but the International Red Cross to help out the earthquake victims. While she is there, she travels around Southern Europe and opens 5 more branches of the International Red Cross in the region. She was 79 years old, still going strong, just crushing it. At 79, she leads her final operation in Galveston, Texas, the famous Galveston hurricane of 1900 that hit in the middle of the night that causes that massive destruction. They were talking about it a few years ago during all those hurricanes. She was once again the first on the scene, and there she saw a problem of a giant magnitude that even she had never seen, and that was a lot of orphans. There were orphans in the wars, but after Galveston, all the adults were gone, so she opens the first Red Cross orphanage to try and find homes and to take care of the young kids who lost their parents in the hurricane of 1900. So this is a picture of Johnstown, the great Johnstown flood in western Pennsylvania. These were houses that were on a hilltop that were walked away and then smashed down into the bottom of the valley. And this is Galveston, Texas, after the hurricane hit. It was like Superstorm Sandy a few years ago. On Long Island, there was just nothing. And so here's Clara at 79 years old, you know, gray hair, you can tell, I mean, she has worked hard, but she's wearing her Red Cross symbol that she will help found, and she's still going. But you're not going to believe what happens. Can anybody guess? A man. A man. Yes, yes. Here it is. She was forced out of office at the age of 83. Now think of everything she's done. Texas, Illinois, Florida, Johnstown, Turkey, the Balkans. She's handled all that, but now she's 83. Ma'am, you know, that looks to be a man's job. We're going to have to ask you this. She's like, are you kidding me? Like, are you for real? And then they bring up some charges that she was profiteering off of money she was getting from the Red Cross. She's like, where? Show me. Here are my books. I literally live in a one-room house. So, and I'm never there because I'm always in a disaster. So she was feisty and angry. So she gets mad and she quits and she starts the 83, the National First Aid Society, teaching basic first aid, and she puts together what she called a first aid kit that should be in everybody's house in the country and help bring notoriety to basic first aid. So, 1997, Clara dies, you know, kind of an unsung hero. How many times did she do something good and so, ma'am, you're just a nice little old lady. We can't have you doing this. That will be stressful. But just time and time again, she rebounds. She comes back even stronger. And from finding displaced persons to reburying dead soldiers to those crises, she's just a dynamic woman of power. And in 1997, Richard Lyons was a governmental carpenter, and there was this old building behind the general accounting office that they were going to try and clean out and modernize and you know, use for more office space. And he's digging around back there, tearing apart the ceiling and getting ready to knock out a wall. And when he knocks out this wall, some of the rubble falls down, and as he's clearing it, he finds these 3 wooden trunks. And he said they looked like treasure chests. He's like, oh man, these are real cool. And he grabs one. It was really heavy. He's like, whoa, wait a minute. This isn't some cheap piece of garbage, and it had a lock. Well, he grabs his hammer and crowbar and he's like, bang! I'm the only one here. And he opens them up, and they were artifacts from Clara Barton's Civil War days. Pictures, canteens, papers, some of her clothes, old photographs, literally treasure troves of the stuff that she had when she was traveling around, records, looking for people, digging them up, reburying them, letters from President Lincoln, letters from, later on, President Grant, and they are now in the Smithsonian going into restoration, and they're going to open shortly here a Clara Barton exhibit in the United States History Smithsonian because Richard blundered on to some things that have been living in a room for decades. I got to give Richard credit because if I'm Richard, I don't know, those things don't make it into my trunk, and you know, at least I'll sort through the good stuff and give some back. So good for old Richard. So she's good. Well, why haven't we made a movie about Clara? That's kind of what I want to know. I mean, Clara's everywhere. Clara's crushing it. So there is Clara. All right, you know, yeah, get Ken on it. You know. Like everyone's got to do. You guys haven't talked this much.
Clara Barton has a rest area on the Jersey Turnpike.
Does she really? Is it
There's
important
only a
to?
dozen.
It's
There's a
what?
dozen on the Jersey Turnpike, and she's one of them. Famous people from New Jersey.
There we go. It's her, Bruce Springsteen.
Vince Lombardi.
Vince-
No, there's no Bruce.
What about Chris Christie? Is it by a bridge? Sometimes not.
So she
No,
never
you
was
mean
a nurse.
shut
She
down.
never was actually a nurse, a real nurse.
She was never a real nurse. Never a real nurse. You know. So anyway, you know, tough lady. Now we go to Eisenhower. And when you guys think of Eisenhower, what do you think of? Especially those of you who've been in here.
I always think of the quote, the military-industrial complex.
Something he coined, bam, all right.
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
all right.
he was on it.
He was, and here's the thing, his
He was a
career,
general. I mean-
his career was made by being a general. I mean, that's who he was. He's General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Does anybody think of him as President Eisenhower? All right, all right. The thing you think is usually the picture back here as he's talking with the 101st Airborne right before D-Day. He's Dwight Eisenhower. He commanded the Eastern Theater of Operations. He was the head guy that helped defeat Nazi Germany. But he was also a very underrated, understated president that does a lot of things that most people...
Highways.
All right. What's that?
The highway system.
Highway system. All right, the highway system. All right. We'll take NASA. All right, the Little Rock Nine. All used American television to help during the Cold War. Now that's who remembers Bonanza? All right. I was always an Adam guy. He was the feisty one. You know, little Joe was always, whining about something. All right. If we got to do this, let's just go and get it done. So anyway, here's General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, good-looking guy, born in Denison, Texas. But moves to Abilene where he's very young, and he always says Abilene was his hometown. And his mom was an old Mennonite, coming from eastern Pennsylvania. They moved to Texas, and she didn't like war. She thought it was violent. But one of the things she had was this,
Sure, right?
all right, kind of is, this great collection of classical history books. It was Alexander the Great, and it was Julius Caesar, and it was Horatio. And Eisenhower said he would read them over and over and over. And man, this is great. Look at these guys and what they're doing. And Alexander is a soldier, but yet he's also smart and da 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 da. And so he falls in love with them. But the family was poor, and he and his older brother make a deal. One will go to college while the other one works to help pay tuition. The next year, they will flip-flop. The other one will go to school, and the other one will work. Well, the older brother gets to go to school first. Dwight takes over. And when the year is up, his brother says, "Hey, Dwight, I'm doing really good. I think I'm going to go back for the second year. Can you work for me?" What? And he was holding like 3 jobs. And he starts talking to a buddy working in a dairy that says, "Hey, I'm going to Annapolis. Why don't you apply and go to the Naval Academy?" "Well, I don't really know if my mom will really let me do that." "Well, you should try." And he applies, but he is just a few months past the age limit. He's too old. He's like, "Well, all right." And they go, "Well, why don't you try West Point?" "What's that?" "Well, it's the Army school. It's, up on the Hudson River." He's like, "All right." So he applies, and he gets in. And as the Naval Academy, good heavens, I'm going to talk to somebody about that. But anyway, all right. Probably a little late, but still. And his brother's like, "Well, you can't do this to me." And he's like, "Well, yeah, right, watch this." Off we go. So he enters West Point, and while he's there, he's smart, but he's not like an outstanding academic. He was away from home for the first time. He's known as a very calm, like even-tempered guy. But man, he's high up there on the demerit list. He was always into some type of shenanigans. But they said he was always dependable. There was always a group of guys around him asking, "Dwight, what should we do? Dwight, what should we do?" And that's interesting because his class is the famous class of 1915.